There is a moment that separates the eternal slave from the sovereign being. It happens when someone attacks you, judges you, condemns you, and you feel nothing. Not numbness, not suppression, not the fake calm of someone pretending not to care, but genuine, absolute indifference to their judgment. They throw their words like spears, and the spears pass through you as if you were made of air. They try to wound you with their opinions, and their opinions evaporate before they reach your skin. They attempt to drag you into their moral courtroom, and you simply don't show up. This is the state beyond judgment, and it is the most dangerous psychological position a human being can occupy. Most people live their entire lives as defendants in a trial that never ends. Every day they wake up and ask themselves, what will they think? Will they approve? Will they judge me? And based on those imagined answers, they determine how to dress, how to speak, what to pursue, what to hide, who to become. They are not living their lives. They are performing for an audience that doesn't care, seeking approval from judges who have no authority, defending themselves against accusations that were never formally made. This is psychological slavery in its purest form. Not chains on your body, but chains on your mind. Not a master with a whip, but a master that lives inside your head, constantly reminding you that you are being watched, evaluated, measured against standards you didn't choose. You have internalized the entire apparatus of judgment. You no longer need external critics because you criticize yourself preemptively. You no longer need external shame because you shame yourself automatically. You have become both prisoner and guard in your own psychological prison. And the tragedy is that you call this civilization. You call this being a good person. You call this social responsibility. But Nietzsche saw it for what it is: a sickness, a degeneration, a castration of the human spirit, the transformation of potentially magnificent beings into docile, manageable, controllable herd animals who police themselves more effectively than any tyrant ever could. But there is another way. A way out of the courtroom. A way beyond the reach of judgment. A way to construct your psychology so that other people's evaluations simply cannot penetrate. This is not arrogance. This is not sociopathy. This is not the delusion of someone who thinks they're above everyone else. This is something far more sophisticated. This is the achievement of someone who has realized that the entire game of judgment is optional, that the courtroom only has power over those who voluntarily enter it, that you can simply stop showing up, and the trial continues without you. Nietzsche spent his life trying to wake people up to this possibility. He called it by different names. The transvaluation of values, beyond good and evil, the sovereign individual. But underneath all the philosophy was a simple psychological insight. Judgment only works on people who accept the judge's authority. Remove that acceptance and you become untouchable. Today, you're going to learn how to remove that acceptance, how to exit the courtroom permanently, how to build a mindset so solid, so complete, so self-referential, that external judgment becomes meaningless noise. 7 psychological shifts that transform you from someone who can be controlled through shame and guilt into someone who is psychologically immune to those weapons. But I need you to understand what you're choosing. This path leads to a kind of loneliness. Not the loneliness of being disliked, but the loneliness of being ungovernable. Once you move beyond judgment, once you stop seeking approval, once you stop accepting others' authority to evaluate you, you exit the social contract that most people operate under. You become other, different, dangerous. and the herd will sense it. They will sense that their primary weapon, social judgment, doesn't work on you, and they will hate you for it. Because your existence proves that the prison is optional. Your freedom reveals their slavery. Your sovereignty exposes their submission. Most people will not pay this price. They will read these words, feel a momentary spark of recognition, and then return to the comfortable prison of caring what others think. They will choose the warmth of approval over the cold freedom of sovereignty. They will remain touchable, remain controllable, remain enslaved, but not you. You feel it already, don't you? That pull towards something beyond the herd. That hunger for a state where you answer to no one but yourself. That rage at having wasted so much of your life seeking permission from people who have no right to grant it. That rage is your will to power waking up. Feed it. Let it burn. Let it incinerate every chain you've been carrying. Because on the other side of that fire is a version of you that cannot be touched by judgment, cannot be controlled by shame, cannot be broken by condemnation. Let's build that version now. The architecture of judgment, how they control you. Before you can escape judgment, you need to understand how it works. How does a simple opinion, a collection of sounds or symbols from another human being, have the power to make you feel terrible about yourself? How does someone else's evaluation, which has no physical substance, no material reality, manage to wound you so deeply that you change your behavior to avoid it? The answer is both simple and devastating. You gave them that power. Not consciously, not deliberately, but through years of conditioning, through the slow accumulation of training that started when you were a child. You built a psychological architecture that makes you vulnerable to judgment. Here's how it was constructed. When you were young, survival depended on pleasing authority figures, parents, teachers, caregivers. These people had genuine power over you. They controlled resources you needed. They determined your safety. Their judgment actually mattered because their judgment came with consequences. Disappoint them, and you suffered. Please them, and you were rewarded. So you learned to be exquisitely sensitive to their judgment. You developed sophisticated radar for detecting approval and disapproval. You became skilled at modifying your behavior to avoid negative judgment and attract positive judgment. This was adaptive. This was survival. This made sense. But then something insidious happened. You grew up. You gained independence. Those authority figures no longer controlled your survival. Their judgment no longer came with material consequences. You could, theoretically, ignore them. But the psychological architecture remained. The radar kept running. The sensitivity persisted. The need for approval didn't disappear just because the survival necessity disappeared. And so you transferred that same dynamic to everyone around you. Your peers, your colleagues, your partners, random strangers on the internet. You gave them the same psychological authority that your childhood caregivers had, even though they have no actual power over you. You treat their judgment as if it matters, as if it determines your worth, as if it should govern your behavior, even though it doesn't and shouldn't. This is the trap. You are living as if you're still a child, depending on others for survival. You are treating the world as if it's full of parents whose approval you need. You are operating with a psychological system designed for dependency in a reality where you could be independent. And society reinforces this trap at every turn. The entire structure of modern civilization is built on making you care what others think. Schools grade you. Employers review you. Social media quantifies approval through likes and shares. Every system you participate in trains you to seek external validation and fear external judgment. But here's what they don't tell you. What they can't tell you, because the entire system would collapse if everyone understood it. Their judgment only has power because you believe it has power. The emperor has no clothes. The judge has no authority. The jury has no legitimate claim on determining your worth. It's all a shared delusion, a collective agreement that we all pretend has objective reality. And the moment you stop pretending, the moment you withdraw your belief in their authority, the entire structure collapses. For you, at least. Everyone else can continue playing the game, but you exit the game entirely. You become ungovernable through judgment because you no longer recognize the legitimacy of the court. This is the first psychological shift you must make. You must see the architecture of judgment for what it is, a control system that only works on volunteers. You volunteered. Now, you're going to resign. Shift 1. Revoke all authority to judge. You have been treating other people as if they have the authority to determine your worth, as if their opinion matters, as if their evaluation is valid, as if they have some legitimate claim on judging you. This is the foundation of your vulnerability. This is the root of your psychological slavery. Today, you revoke that authority. All of it. From everyone. This is not done through declaration. You cannot simply say, I don't care what people think, and have it be true. Your nervous system doesn't believe you. Your conditioning is too deep. Your automatic responses are too ingrained. You'll say you don't care, and then someone will criticize you, and you'll feel that familiar sting, that familiar need to defend yourself, that familiar anxiety about being judged. The revocation must be done methodically. Psychologically, you must dismantle the belief system that gives others authority over you. Here's how. Start with this realization. For someone's judgment of you to matter, they would need to meet certain criteria. They would need to understand you completely. They would need to know your context, your history, your intentions, your constraints, your goals, your values. They would need to be wiser than you, more experienced than you, more capable of evaluating your life than you are. They would need to be operating from a place of genuine care for your well-being, rather than their own interests or biases. Now look at the people judging you, your critics, your audience, the people whose opinions you fear. Do they meet these criteria? Do they understand you completely? Do they know your full context? Are they wiser and more capable than you? Are they genuinely invested in your well-being? The answer, in almost every case, is no. They're operating from incomplete information. They're projecting their own biases. They're judging you based on their values, not yours. They're evaluating your choices without understanding your constraints. They're measuring you against standards that have nothing to do with your actual goals. In other words, they're not qualified to judge you. They lack the necessary information, wisdom, and legitimacy to make their judgment meaningful. Their opinion is just noise. Data points from people who don't understand the full picture. Now here's the crucial part. Even if they were qualified, even if they did understand you completely, even if they were wiser and more capable, their judgment would still only be their perspective. It would still be one interpretation among infinite possible interpretations. It would still be their subjective evaluation, not objective truth. Because there is no objective truth about your worth. There is no universal standard against which you can be measured. There is no cosmic judge who knows the right answer. There is only a multiplicity of perspectives, each incomplete, each biased, each reflecting the values and limitations of the person holding it. So when someone judges you, they're not revealing truth. They're revealing themselves, their values, their biases, their limitations. Their judgment tells you about them, not about you. Once you see this clearly, once you really understand that judgment is just opinion, and opinion is just perspective, and perspective is just one of infinite possible viewpoints, the authority dissolves. How can you grant authority to something you recognize as fundamentally subjective and incomplete? You can't, and you don't. You simply observe their judgment the way you'd observe the weather. Interesting. That person has that opinion about me. No emotional charge, no defensive reaction, no need to prove them wrong or convince them otherwise. Just neutral observation of a fact. They have an opinion. This is the first shift, from treating judgment as authority to treating judgment as data, from believing others have a legitimate claim on evaluating you to recognizing they're simply expressing their limited perspective, from being a defendant in their courtroom to being an anthropologist observing their behavior. Practice this relentlessly. Every time you feel the sting of judgment, pause. Ask yourself, why am I treating this person's opinion as if it has authority over me? What qualifies them to judge me? What makes their perspective more valid than any other perspective? The answer will always reveal the same thing: nothing. They have no authority. You gave it to them. Now take it back. Shift 2. See the resentment behind the judgment. Here's something most people never realize. The harshest judgments come from the most resentful people. The most vicious condemnation comes from those who are bitter about their own lives. The cruelest critics are usually the biggest failures. This is not a coincidence. This is the mechanism Nietzsche identified in his genealogy of morality. Judgment is a weapon of the weak against the strong. When someone cannot achieve what you've achieved, cannot become what you've become, cannot do what you're doing, they have two choices. They can accept their inability and feel inadequate, or they can judge what you're doing as wrong and feel morally superior. Most people choose the second option. It's easier. It protects their ego. It transforms their failure into virtue. This is why people who accomplish nothing are often the quickest to judge those who accomplish something. This is why those who take no risks are the first to criticize those who do. This is why the mediocre spend so much energy condemning the excellent. It's not about you. It's about them managing their own feelings of inadequacy. Nietzsche called this resentment, the resentment of the weak toward the strong, transformed into a moral system. The slave who cannot defeat the master through strength instead defeats him through judgment. Actually, you're bad. Actually, your strength is oppression. Actually, your success is exploitation. Actually, your confidence is arrogance. This moral inversion makes the slave feel superior without requiring the slave to actually become superior. And you've been internalizing this poison your entire life. Every time someone judges you, you've been treating their judgment as legitimate evaluation, rather than recognizing it for what it usually is: resentment disguised as righteousness. The second shift is learning to see the resentment behind the judgment. When someone criticizes you, don't ask, is their criticism valid? Ask, what does their criticism reveal about their own frustrations? Watch how this transforms your relationship to judgment. Someone attacks your ambition? They're revealing their own lack of ambition. Someone condemns your confidence? They're showing you their insecurity. Someone judges your success, they're exposing their failure. Someone criticizes your choices, they're demonstrating their own inability to make bold choices. Their judgment is a confession, a window into their psychology, a reveal of what they lack and resent in themselves. And once you see it this way, how can you take it personally? How can you let it wound you? It has nothing to do with you and everything to do with them. This doesn't mean all judgment is resentment. Sometimes people offer legitimate feedback from a place of genuine care. But you'll know the difference. Feedback feels clean. It's specific. It's actionable. It comes from someone invested in your growth. Resentful judgment feels dirty. It's vague. It's character assassination. It comes from someone invested in cutting you down. When you encounter resentful judgment, and you will encounter it constantly as you rise, treat it as data about the judge, not about you. They're revealing their own wounds, their own failures, their own inadequacies, none of which are your concern. This shift makes you untouchable in a specific way. You stop absorbing the poison of resentful judgment. You stop letting bitter people infect you with their bitterness. You stop internalizing the moral framework of those who judge you precisely because they cannot become you. Let them judge. Let them condemn. Let them wrap their resentment in the language of morality and righteousness. You see through it. You recognize it. You understand it for what it is. And you remain unmoved. Shift 3. Build on internal standards, not external approval. You cannot be beyond judgment while you're still measuring yourself by judgments. You cannot be untouchable while you're still seeking touches of approval. You cannot be sovereign while you're still checking with others to see if you're doing it right. The third shift is the most difficult because it requires you to build an entirely new foundation for your sense of self. Most people derive their self-worth from external validation. They feel good about themselves when others approve. They feel bad about themselves when others disapprove. Their emotional state, their sense of identity, their belief in their own worth, all of it rises and falls based on the feedback they receive from the world around them. This makes them psychologically vulnerable in the most fundamental way, because external validation is completely out of your control. You can do everything right and still be judged harshly. You can achieve remarkable things and still be criticized. You can live according to the highest standards and still be condemned by those operating from different standards. If your self-worth depends on external approval, then your self-worth depends on things you cannot control, which means you have no stable ground to stand on. You're at the mercy of other people's moods, biases, and agendas. You're a boat tossed by waves you didn't create and cannot calm. The shift is to build your foundation on internal standards instead, to derive your sense of worth from your own evaluation of whether you're living according to your own values. Not their values, yours. Not society's standards, yours. Not the crowd's judgment, your own. This requires doing something most people never do, consciously defining your values and standards. Not discovering what you should value, not adopting what others value, but actually deciding, deliberately and consciously, what matters to you. What kind of person you want to be, what principles you want to live by, what goals you want to pursue. Write them down. Be specific. These are your commandments, your law, your measure. And from this moment forward, you judge yourself only by these standards. Did I live according to my values today? Did I act in alignment with my principles? Am I making progress toward my goals? These are the only questions that matter. When you do this, When you really do this, something remarkable happens. External judgment loses its power. Someone praises you for something you don't value? Irrelevant. Someone criticizes you for something that doesn't matter to you? Meaningless. Someone condemns you for violating a standard you don't accept? Who cares? But here's the paradox. When you stop seeking external approval, you often get more of it. Because people sense the difference between someone who needs validation and someone who doesn't. Desperation repels. Self-sufficiency attracts. When you stop performing for approval, you become more genuinely yourself, which is more magnetic than any performance could be. This doesn't mean ignoring feedback. It means filtering feedback through your own standards. Someone offers criticism? You evaluate it. Does this help me live according to my values? Does this help me achieve my goals? If yes, you integrate it. If no, you discard it. The judgment itself has no inherent power. Only you decide what to do with it. This shift requires daily practice. Every day you will feel the pull to check if others approve. Every day you will be tempted to measure yourself by external metrics. Every day you will want to know what they think, and every day you redirect back to your internal standards, back to your own evaluation, back to the only judgment that actually matters, your judgment of yourself. Over time, this becomes automatic. You stop checking for approval reflexively. You stop caring about judgment automatically. You become psychologically self-sufficient, self-referential, complete unto yourself. And in that completion, you become untouchable. Shift 4. Embrace the misunderstanding. You want to be understood. You want people to see your intentions. You want them to know your context. You want them to recognize that you're doing your best. You want them to appreciate the complexity of your situation. And when they don't, when they misunderstand you, misjudge you, misrepresent you, you feel this desperate need to correct the record, to explain, to make them see the truth. This need is a vulnerability. This need is a chain. This need keeps you tethered to their judgment, because as long as you need to be understood, they have power over you. They can withhold understanding. They can refuse to listen. They can deliberately misrepresent you, and all of it wounds you because you've made being understood necessary for your peace. The fourth shift is embracing the misunderstanding, accepting, even welcoming, the fact that most people will never understand you, never see your full context, never appreciate your intentions, never recognize the complexity of what you're doing. They will judge you based on incomplete information, and they will be wrong, and that's fine. Nietzsche understood this deeply. He wrote knowing that most people would misunderstand him, knowing that his ideas would be twisted, misrepresented, weaponized, and he wrote anyway. He didn't waste time trying to make himself palatable to those who would never understand. He wrote for the few who would. Everyone else could misunderstand. Their misunderstanding was irrelevant. This is the mindset you need to adopt. Not everyone needs to understand you. Not everyone is capable of understanding you. Not everyone is worth the effort of explaining yourself to. And trying to make everyone understand is a waste of your finite time and energy. Here's the brutal truth. People will understand you to the degree that their consciousness allows. If they're operating from a limited perspective, they'll interpret you through that limitation. If they're projecting their own issues, they'll see you through that projection. If they lack the context to understand, they'll fill in the gaps with assumptions. And no amount of explanation will fix this. Because the problem isn't lack of information. The problem is lack of capacity or willingness to understand. So stop trying. Stop explaining. Stop defending. Stop attempting to correct every misunderstanding. Let them be wrong. Let them judge you based on their misunderstanding. Let them create entire narratives about you that have nothing to do with reality. None of it matters unless you make it matter. This is extraordinarily liberating. When you stop needing to be understood, you stop being controllable through misunderstanding. Someone deliberately misrepresents you to damage your reputation. You don't waste energy fighting it. Someone judges you based on incomplete information. You don't feel compelled to provide the missing information. Someone creates a story about you that's completely false. You let them live in their fiction. Because here's what you've realized. Being understood by everyone is impossible and unnecessary. Being understood by yourself is sufficient. Being understood by the few who matter is a gift. Everyone else's misunderstanding is just noise. This shift transforms how you move through the world. You stop explaining yourself constantly. You stop justifying your choices to people who aren't owed an explanation. You stop trying to control how you're perceived by controlling the information. You simply do what you do. Be who you are and let people interpret it however they want. And strangely, paradoxically, this often leads to being understood better by those capable of understanding because you're no longer performing. You're no longer managing perceptions. You're simply being authentic. And authenticity is recognizable to those with eyes to see it, even if the details are misunderstood. Let them misunderstand. Let them misjudge. Let them be completely wrong about who you are and what you're doing. Their misunderstanding is their problem, not yours. You know the truth. That's enough. Shift 5. Transform judgment into irrelevant noise. By now, you've revoked their authority, seen their resentment, built internal standards, and embraced misunderstanding. But you're still aware of the judgment. You still hear it. You still register it. It doesn't wound you as deeply, but it's still there, still present, still something you have to actively ignore or process. The fifth shift is more complete. It's transforming judgment from something you resist into something you barely register, from something that requires effort to dismiss into something that simply doesn't penetrate your consciousness as meaningful. This is the difference between ignoring noise and genuinely not hearing it as significant. Think about background noise in a city. At first, when you move to a city, you're constantly aware of traffic sounds, sirens, construction. Your brain processes all of it. It's annoying. It's distracting. Over time, your brain learns to filter it out. You stop consciously hearing it. It doesn't disappear, but it becomes background. Irrelevant. Your consciousness doesn't waste resources processing it because it's been categorized as non-threatening and unimportant. This is what needs to happen with judgment. Right now, judgment still registers as significant. Your brain still processes it as something meaningful. Even if you've learned not to react, you're still expending energy on not reacting. You're still engaged with it, even if that engagement is dismissal. The shift is training your brain to categorize judgment the same way it categorizes background noise, as fundamentally irrelevant to your well-being, as data that doesn't require processing, as sounds that don't merit attention. Here's how you achieve this. Every time you encounter judgment, you consciously label it irrelevant noise. Don't argue with it. Don't analyze it. Don't decide if it's valid or invalid. Simply categorize it as irrelevant and move your attention elsewhere, like you'd move your attention away from a car horn or a distant siren. The first 100 times, this will require effort. You'll feel the pull to engage, to analyze, to defend or accept. you'll have to consciously redirect. But with repetition, with consistency, your brain learns the pattern. Judgment arrives, brain categorizes it as irrelevant. Attention doesn't engage. It becomes automatic. When this shift is complete, something extraordinary happens. Judgment doesn't hurt anymore because it doesn't register as something that could hurt. It's like someone trying to insult you in a language you don't speak. The sounds happen, but they carry no meaning. They're just sounds. People judge you, and you genuinely don't care, not in the sense of forcing yourself not to care, but in the sense of caring never even occurring to you as an option. It's not that you're suppressing the emotional response. It's that the emotional response never activates because the judgment never registers as significant enough to warrant emotion. This is true untouchability, not the untouchability of someone who has thick skin and can take hits, but the untouchability of someone who isn't even in the arena where the hits are being thrown. The judgment is happening in a dimension you no longer occupy. You walk through life and people judge you constantly. They always have been, they always will be. But now it's like rain falling on a mountain. The mountain doesn't react, doesn't flinch, doesn't even register the rain as something to respond to. The rain happens. The mountain remains, unchanged, unmoved, untouched. Shift. 6. Use judgment as fuel, not poison. There will be times when judgment does penetrate. When criticism comes from someone you respect, or touches on something you're actually uncertain about, or accumulates to such a volume that it cannot be entirely filtered out. In these moments, you need something more than dismissal. You need transformation. The 6th shift is alchemical. It's learning to take judgment, which most people experience as poison that weakens them, and transform it into fuel that strengthens them. This is Nietzsche's concept of what doesn't kill you makes you stronger, applied specifically to psychological attacks. Here's how most people handle criticism that lands. They either crumble under it, accepting it as truth, and feeling diminished, or they rage against it, spending enormous energy fighting it and proving it wrong. Both responses give the criticism power. Both responses let it control you. You're either destroyed by it or defined by your opposition to it. The shift is to use it. When judgment penetrates, when criticism lands, when condemnation stings, you ask yourself, how does this make me stronger? What can I extract from this that serves me? How can I transform this attack into advantage? Sometimes the answer is simple. The criticism, even if poorly delivered, contains useful information. Someone judges your work as sloppy? Maybe it is. Maybe you've been letting standards slip. Extract the useful data. Tighten your standards. Discard the emotional content, their judgment of you as a person. Boom. You've transformed criticism into improvement. Sometimes the answer is more subtle. The criticism reveals nothing true about you, but reveals everything about what triggers people. Someone judges you as too confident. That tells you confidence threatens them. Someone criticizes you as too ambitious. That shows you ambition makes them uncomfortable. You now know their weaknesses. You now understand what tools work on them if you ever need leverage. Information is power. Their judgment just gave you information. Sometimes the answer is motivational. Someone says you can't do something. That becomes fuel. Someone predicts you'll fail. That becomes motivation. Someone judges your goal as impossible. That becomes the reason you pursue it even harder. You transform their doubt into your determination. Their negativity becomes your energy source. This is advanced psychology. This is beyond just not caring about judgment. This is actively benefiting from judgment. This is making yourself anti-fragile, not just resistant to attacks, but strengthened by them. Not just surviving criticism, but thriving because of it. The more they judge, the stronger you become. The more they criticize, the more motivated you are. The more they attack, the more information you gather. You've turned the weapon they use against you into a weapon you use for yourself. And here's what happens when you master this. You stop fearing judgment. In fact, you start welcoming it. Because you know that whether it's valid or invalid, whether it comes from a good place or resentment, whether it's true or false, you can extract value from it. It literally cannot harm you and can only help you. You've become immune, and more, you've become a transformer that turns poison into medicine. People sense this. They sense that attacking you doesn't weaken you, and it unsettles them. Because the primary weapon of social control suddenly doesn't work. It backfires. It makes you stronger. They shoot arrows, and you catch them and add them to your quiver. This is power. This is sovereignty. This is untouchability in its most sophisticated form. Shift 7. Become your own judge. The final shift is the culmination of everything. You've revoked their authority. You've seen their resentment. You've built internal standards. You've embraced misunderstanding. You've transformed judgment into irrelevant noise. You've learned to use judgment as fuel. Now the final step, become your own judge. This is what Nietzsche called the sovereign individual, someone who has taken complete responsibility for evaluating themselves, someone who has become their own authority, someone who judges themselves by their own standards and accepts no other judgment as relevant. This is not ego. This is not delusion. This is not pretending you're perfect. This is the opposite. This is holding yourself to standards that are probably higher than anyone else would hold you to, but standards you chose, standards that make sense for what you're trying to become. When you become your own judge, you judge yourself honestly. You see your failures clearly. You acknowledge your weaknesses. You recognize when you fall short of your own standards. But you do all of this internally, according to your own values, without needing external validation that you're judging correctly. And here's the key. You also celebrate your victories internally. You acknowledge your strengths. You recognize when you live up to your standards. You give yourself credit for your achievements, all without needing others to confirm that you deserve the credit. You become complete, self-sufficient, a closed loop. You evaluate, you judge, you adjust, you celebrate, all internally. The external world's judgment becomes genuinely irrelevant because you have a functioning, sophisticated, honest internal judgment system that you trust more than anyone else's judgment. This is what it means to be beyond judgment. Not that no one judges you. They will, always. But that their judgment is simply irrelevant because you have a better, more informed, more sophisticated judge, yourself. And you trust your own judgment completely, not because you're always right, but because you're the only one with access to the full context. You're the only one who knows your intentions. You're the only one who understands your constraints. You're the only one who knows what you're really trying to accomplish. You're the only one qualified to judge you. When you achieve this, when you truly become your own judge, you achieve a state of psychological sovereignty that most people never even conceptualize as possible. You walk through life evaluating yourself constantly, adjusting constantly, growing constantly, but never once consulting the external world to see if you're doing it right, because you know you're doing it right when you're living according to your values. You know you're failing when you violate your own standards. You know you're growing when you're closer to who you want to become. And you know all of this internally, immediately, without needing anyone else to tell you. This is freedom. This is untouchability. This is what it means to be beyond judgment. You stand at the end of the path. 7 shifts that, if integrated completely, make you psychologically immune to the weapon of judgment that controls everyone else. You've learned to revoke authority, see resentment, build internal standards, embrace misunderstanding, transform judgment into noise, use it as fuel, and become your own judge. This is not theory. This is practical psychology. This is exactly how you construct a mind that cannot be penetrated by judgment. This is the blueprint for untouchability. But knowledge is not transformation. Reading these words is not the same as living these principles. You must practice. You must apply. You must repeatedly, consistently, relentlessly implement these shifts until they become your automatic response, until they become your nature. The world will judge you tomorrow, and the next day, and every day after. This will never stop. The question is, will their judgment touch you? Will it wound you? Will it control you? Or will it pass through you like wind through an open window, noticed briefly and forgotten immediately? Nietzsche wrote for those rare individuals capable of psychological sovereignty. He knew most people would remain slaves to judgment their entire lives, would continue seeking approval, would continue fearing condemnation, would continue giving others authority over their sense of self. They would read these words and return to the comfortable prison of caring what others think. But some wouldn't. Some would recognize themselves in this vision. Some would feel the possibility stirring. Some would realize they've been living as defendants in a courtroom that has no legitimate authority, and they could simply stop showing up. You're one of those people. You feel it. That pull toward sovereignty, that hunger for freedom, that rage at having wasted so much energy seeking approval from people whose opinion shouldn't matter. The path is clear. The shifts are defined. The transformation is possible. All that remains is your choice. Will you do the work? Will you integrate these shifts? Will you become untouchable? Or will you read these words, feel inspired for a moment, and then return to checking what they think, return to needing their approval, return to being controlled by their judgment? The courtroom is waiting for you to return. The judges are ready. The audience is watching. They expect you to show up and perform and defend yourself and seek their approval. Will you? Or will you simply not appear? Will you exit the courtroom permanently and build your life beyond its walls, beyond its reach, beyond judgment itself? The choice is yours. But understand this: once you choose sovereignty, once you truly move beyond judgment, you can never go back. You can never unsee what you've seen. You can never return to caring what they think. You will be free, but you will be alone in your freedom. Different, other, dangerous. Most people will not pay this price. But you're not most people. You're the one who becomes untouchable. Welcome to the other side of judgment. Welcome to sovereignty. Welcome to freedom. Now go. Build the untouchable mind, and never bow to their judgment again.